Hi there, Mark here again, and welcome to part 1 of my build guide for the Tamiya CC-02 chassis, which will eventually become the Ford Bronco 2021. Now, with all kit builds, what I highly recommend is that you spend a bit of time before you start building, going through the manual, familiarising yourself with all the steps that are going to be involved and everything that's coming up, and go through all the parts in the box and make sure you're ready for what's about to come up. Now, I'm glad I did that on this one because there are quite a few options that you've got to make. So you've got choices to make as you build it. You've got gear ratio options, you've got servo mounting options, and also whether to lock the diffs or not. So the first real step is step 2, which is building up the gears or the idler gears, and it really leads you straight into building up with the standard gear ratios. But if you look down here, you've got a greyed out area which shows building up the low speed gear ratio. So if you want to go more trail running, slow running, you want to build with that gear ratio, the lower gears, you can actually see what those gear ratios are. So with the standard gear ratio, you're looking at 17:1, around about. And with the low speed ratio, it's almost 30:1. So it's an absolutely massive difference in gear ratios. And also interestingly, you can go from the 16 tooth pinion, which is standard with the kit, all the way up to a 25 tooth pinion. That would be a crazy top speed with the standard gear ratio. But so there you go, they're the options you've got. As I said, I've seen most people build these with the low speed ratio, so I'm going to go opposite and I'm going to go with the standard ratio and see how it goes, but I can always change it later. Now, looking through, the CC02 is a bit more of a premium level kit from Tamiya. I think it's up there in price anyway with the TD4 and the XV02, for example, and as such there are lots of parts and it's going to be a rather fiddly build, I think. So I'm not going to show every single screw going in and every single piece going together because we'll be here forever, but I will go through each step showing the major parts and how everything fits together. I'll also be going through the options in detail and hopefully throwing a few tips here and there. However, unlike the XV02 and the TD4, this kit does not come with metal bearings. It comes with these horrible plastic bushings. If you're going to be running this off-road in mud and dirt and water, I would highly recommend straight away get yourself a set of metal bearings. And I've got the rubber sealed options, which I think are better for running in dirt and mud. And the other thing I really recommend you get before you start the build is get rid of this aluminium pinion. It's made of a material more like cheese than aluminium, and get yourself a nice steel one like I have here. Okay, then on with the build. Let's get all the parts we need for step 2. So we've got 3 shafts to make up with 4 gears, and best if you just get those laid out like so. So we've got the gears matched up with the shafts that I need. So we get the first one, pop that onto the shaft. You need a 2x10 pin, and that should locate in the slot like so. Another 2x10 pin, then your 26 tooth gear, and that should locate again on the pin. Just make sure it's located and won't turn. 1150 bearing, and then we need to put one of those pesky circlips or E-rings onto the ends just to hold it all together. There we go. And then just pop another 1150 on the other side, and that's the one made up. So we just made up gear shaft B, now it's shaft A. Don't know why it's the wrong way around, but hey, don't think it matters which way around the shaft goes, but you need the shorter 8mm pin or bar that goes in the end there. Then you've got the 19 tooth, this is a metal gear that should locate on that pin, I think. There we go. An 1150 bearing on that end and an 1150 bearing on the other end. I think that's that. Gear shaft C, I think I'm going to start off by just putting a circlip in that slot there. Push it down on the bench is an easy way of doing it. You've got 2x10 bar goes through the hole. Your 20 tooth plastic gear again locates on that shaft and shouldn't spin. 1150 bearing on that end and an 1150 bearing on the other end, and that's the 3 shafts made up. And just to note, for the low speed gear ratio, it's basically just a matter of swapping that gear from that shaft with that gear on that shaft. So you swap them over and it changes the gear ratio. Okay, so on to step 3, and I told you this would be a fiddly build, and here's a good example. If you look at this symbol here, it says apply synthetic rubber cement, as you can see here. And I've had a quick flick through the manual, and as you can see, it also shows it here, and here, again here, and here. So what I've done is I've gone through, I've got all those parts, and I've got those, they're all 3mm nuts apart from this one here, and I've gone and stuck them into the plastic pieces. I don't know if you can see whether the camera will pick it up here, but you might just see the nuts in there. So yeah, I've pre-glued them all using this flexible glue. I think it's appropriate for the job. It gives a flexible bond, and I think that's what's needed. So it does take a while to dry, so yeah, I do recommend that you do the same. Just go through, glue all those nuts in place, and then you haven't got to worry about it as you go through the build steps. So back to step 3, let's get on with it. You might be able to see again, there's a nut in there and there's a nut in there pre-glued. So basically get your 3 shafts lined up as it is in the diagram, and get part A1, note the alignment, so you want it this way up. And I've just had a try at this, it is really fiddly. The things fall apart, you've got to be really careful. The pins will drop out and your bearings will fall out and all sorts, so yeah, just carefully try and get them in. So get that one in first, then the biggest one. And what I found is you have to fiddle around because you can't get that bearing on this last one past that big gear, so you need to kind of fiddle about with it. And if you're not careful, as I said, they will fall apart. So we'll try and get this one in. Okay, that's just gone. So make sure they all turn okay, and get a bunch of grease on all these gears, and then it's just a case of getting part A2 over the top and fitting all the screws as it shows in the diagrams. And that's of course after not forgetting to fit in this tiny little 2x6 tap-in screw and tiny little 2mm washer, like I just forgot. I missed that completely. So that goes in there, and then you got the tiny screw. I hope that's in focus, so you get that screwed in, and I think that's to hold that captive nut in, I'm not sure, but anyway, but it says put it in, so put it in. Okay, the screws are done up. This is what it should look like at the end of step 3 after all that faffing about. And if you just turn that shaft there, it should all turn nice and smoothly, and turn the output shafts there. And step 4 is attaching the spur gear, which is this thing here. As it shows, part A5 is that lighter plastic part there. It's just held on by 2 8mm screws, nice and simple. But fitting it onto the actual shaft there is a new one on me. So it goes on that way round, and we need to put a 10mm pin through the hole in the shaft to hold it in place. So just get the slot lined up with the hole and then put that shaft through. Just push it into place, as you can see there. And yeah, this is a new one. You got another tiny 2x6 self-tapping screw, and that goes into that hole there. And it's just that screw then holding that pin in place. Straight on to step 5, where we're going to attach the spur gear cover. And again, so I don't miss this time, you've got another one of those tiny 2x6 screws and a washer, and that goes in here. Hope you can just see it there in shot. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think that's just to stop that captive nut that you've glued in there from falling into the gear. That's what I think it's for anyway. Hopefully you can see it a bit better there. Yeah, so make sure you put that in. You've got that nut and that 3mm nut are the ones you glue in place. It's just a case of note the alignment and pop the cover over. You've got just 4 3x10 screws to hold that in place, and it also shows using some glue to stick on part A6, which does actually clip into place, but it says put some glue on, which I will because it's just spinning around at the moment. So yeah, I'll get the screws in and the glue on that cap. So there we go, that's the end of step 5. These 3 screws here are 12mm long, and that is a 3x10. And yeah, bit of glue on there, and job's a good one. As you can see, step 6 is just attaching the pinion to the motor. You put on this kind of cardboard plate first, and just make sure that the end of the pinion here is 14mm away from that motor plate. So straight away in step 7, we're going to attach that motor to the gearbox that we've made. So we've basically got to line the holes up. And strangely, we've got hex head cap screws and 3B8, and you need to put on those little aluminium spacers, MA9s, and yeah, try and find the holes. And again, I don't know if you can see on there, that spacer's on there. I don't know what the spacer's for. It's definitely a spacer and not a washer. And as you can see, these holes are elongated, the motor moves, and you need to set the mesh not too tight and not too loose. Hopefully you can just see in here the teeth of the spur gear moving just slightly there, so it's not rammed right close up, the teeth aren't meshing too tightly, and it's nice and smooth when you rotate it with your finger. So now I'm just going to get some ceramic grease on all of this and get the cover on, which is this part A4, just sits in there, and we secure that with the last of the hex-headed machine screws. Step 6 is attaching the battery case, which is this part E5, but we're going to attach that to E6, the kind of bottom part of the chassis. But first I'm going to put on part E4, which you have to pre-glue those nuts into there, the 3mm nuts. So that simply just fits on there like so, and it's 2 10mm tappers in the 2 outside holes, and then a 15mm in that middle hole. So that's E4 attached, as you can see. So E5 has got to go here, and that's into the centre of these 3 holes here at the rear. So it's 2 22mm screws, the really long ones go in those back holes, and then 2 3B15s in the holes that are inside the case. And I hope you can see there. So I'll just get those done up. And with that done, it's just a case of fitting the battery strap, which is this part F6, and you need the battery post. It screws into this hole here, then a 3x18 machine screw, fit on a large washer, and a little plastic part C9, and that's going to hold the strap in place and allow it to pivot. So put that into the other hole like so, so that pivots round, that goes over that post, and as it shows in the diagram here, you can put nuts underneath these posts to raise that strap up in case you've got thicker batteries. Pop the large R pin in, and that's the end of step 8. Step 9 is attaching the main frame rails, which are F9 and F10, and you can see in the diagram where it shows you to put all those nuts in and glue them in place. Again, I've already done that with these. So copying the orientation of the diagram, I'm going to get F9 first, and I'm going to line up that hole there with this hole at the bottom here where my thumb is, and that should be in the right place. Like so, and we'll just get the 12mm tapper in there, and that'll hold it in place. Another 12mm into this hole here, and finally a 12mm machine screw into that third of those 3 holes, and that's going to go into that captive nut that we glued in earlier. And then fit the other frame rail F10 in exactly the same way to the other side. And you should end up with something looking a bit like this. Okay, so on to step 10, and this is a really important step because it's where we have to make one of those decisions, and it's whether we mount the servo in a horizontal plane or in an upright plane. Now I've looked into this, and there seem to be downsides to both ways. If you mount it horizontally, it looks like the suspension on full travel, the axle will hit the servo itself, and with it in the upright position, it looks like you've got quite a lot of bumps there, so when the suspension moves up and down, the steering actually turns. So I'm going to go with the first option, which is to have it horizontal. Anyway, you can always change it later if you want to. So basically you've got these plastic parts C12 and C11, they're marked A and B on them. You've got that captive nut there and yeah, a 6mm screw. So you make them both up like that. If you just take a look, that's what they look like from the other side. Then you've got part F5, which will actually hold the servo itself. And again, I don't know if you can see in there, but I've put those captive nuts in, they're glued in. And this is where we can change the position. So for horizontal mounting, it's going to go into the bracket there, like so. And for an upright or vertical servo, you just rotate it 90 degrees and it fits on like that. As I said though, I'm putting mine in the horizontal position, so I'm just going to put the 6mm machine screw into that hole to hold it in place. And obviously the same on the other side. So there's my finished front subframe for a horizontal mounted servo. Step 11 is simply attaching that front subframe we just built. Just slide it onto the front of the chassis like that, and it's simply a 12mm machine screw with a spring washer on it, goes in that hole at the back there, and a 3/8 into that hole there. And the same on the other side. Step 12 is the rear cross member, so you get this part F7 and get your 3-in-1 nuts, drop them down into the slots at each side. So one in there and one over here. Then part C11 fits on that side with an 8mm machine screw, and then part C12 goes on the other side. And there's the finished cross member. Step 13, I'm going to fit this to the chassis, but first you've got to get these two channels, the metal channels, and you've got to glue in that part C3 into the third hole along, as you can see there. And they look like they're going to hold nuts, but they're not. They're going to be just spacers, as you'll see now. So at the rear of the chassis we've got the channel, again with that in the third hole along, and that just places over there like so. The same with the other channel on the other side. Just pop that on and get your cross member, and that's going to go across the first of the third hole in that channel, as you can see, and it's just two 15mm machine screws that go into those captive nuts. And there you go, should look like that. That's step 13 complete. Okay then, so that's starting to look a bit more like a chassis now, isn't it? And I think the assembly that we've done earlier is going to slot in there, something like that. But I think this is enough for part 1 of the build guide. I think I've gone on long enough. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers!